And again, we go into the breach. So, the Middle Ages, punctuated by the Crusades, are now officially over. We have a new time period to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. Open your notebook and make sure you're taking your notes. I'm going to have a conversation right now with Miss Letterber about making your notebooks an essay grade. Let's do that right now. So if you're not taking your notes, I got like some emergency call. I think they're coming to get me. Maybe I'll just hang up. I'm going to talk to Ms. Letterber about making your notebook grade an essay grade for you. So that way you get credit for all the notes that you're taking. So be sure that you're taking your notes and keep your notes. Keep your notes. It's how we learn things, is by retyping them down, writing them down. You just can't watch TV. You don't learn anything from TV, and you don't learn anything from these lectures unless you're actively engaged by taking notes. In your notebook, go down to Renaissance. Renaissance is a French word. It means rebirth. If you recall, Europe was rocking during the Roman Empire, specifically the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. You had roads, you had bridges, you had these massive aqueducts to bring water to cities. You had infrastructure, garbage pickup on Wednesdays, sewage and sanitation. The Romans had things rolling, but then, of course, the Roman Empire collapsed, if you recall. Secession, they didn't know who was going to be the next Caesar, so therefore they fought constant civil wars, and it left them open to enemies at the border. That would be the Germans that come flooding in. Secession, civil wars, German tribes, and the fall of the Roman Empire, and the subsequent Dark Ages and Middle Ages, Vikings and Charlemagne and everything else that happens in Europe. Well, 1,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe is back! They're back, baby! Europe has finally recovered from the trauma that was the fall of the Roman Empire, and we call this period of rebirth the Renaissance. Not to be confused with me, I'm often called a Renaissance man. But the Renaissance, so go to your notebook. Renaissance is a rebirth. It's a rebirth of industry. It's a rebirth of art, a rebirth of culture, a rebirth of government, a rebirth of infrastructure, a rebirth of what eventually becomes our world that we enjoy here. So, if we could, what causes this? Why? Why do these Middle Ages end? You don't have to have that in your notebook. I want this in your notebook, this next slide. Right here. That's right, right down. Oh, you can't see it? Sorry. Ironically, the Crusades were bringing new ideas and prosperity to Europe. They were horrible, horrific wars in which Christians attacked Muslims and invaded Muslim lands to free Jerusalem for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They have done permanent damage to this day in relationships between Christians and Muslims. And of course, then you had September 11th. Anyways, Islam is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of love and forgiveness. You wouldn't know that the way that they have been practiced at times, of course. So have this in your notes. Ironically, the Crusades were bringing new ideas and prosperity to Europe. Wars are traumatic and horrible, but wars are often times of huge technological advancements. It was true of us during World War I. It was true of us during World War II, true during the Cold War, true during the War on Terror. And is also true during the Crusades. If you recall, the world of the Arab Empire, the world of Islam, the Arabs were the more advanced civilization. So while the Crusades were fighting and dying, God wills it for Jerusalem. They're also learning from the Arabs. What were they learning? Put this in underneath. Just put this little note down there. They're learning Arab ideas of algebra, mathematics, Arabic numerals. So put algebra. Put alchemy, which becomes like chemistry. Algebra, alchemy. Put gunpowder down. Now, gunpowder is a Chinese invention, but the Arabs had contact with the Chinese. The Arabs knew about gunpowder, and now the Crusaders will take that knowledge of gunpowder back to Europe. Pretty soon they're going to start experimenting with it and create boom sticks, guns. Algebra, alchemy, gunpowder, silks and spices. Put silks and spices down. Silks and spices. You can only get silks and spices, even today to a degree. You can only get them from China. The Roman Empire traded with China for silks and spices, All that trade had kind of collapsed. Well, now it's going to come back thanks to the Crusades. Also, Arab ideas of medicine. Put medicine. The Arabs had medical schools. They did not have medical schools in Europe. They had medical knowledge, mostly monks in monasteries had some medical knowledge, but beyond that, not really. So the Crusades were terrible, horrible, horrible wars, but they weren't fought in Europe. They were fought over here in Arab lands, right around here, around Jerusalem. All of these great ideas were brought back to Europe and will make Europeans' lives better. One of the ideas that's brought back, one of the ideas that's brought back, there's Ramon! One of the ideas that's brought, there it is, algebra, knowledge of Greece and Rome, alchemy, medicine, okay, you got that. Silks and spices! Yes. Another idea that's brought back is the windmill. The windmill is an idea brought back from the Arabs, and you have the first mechanization of labor, the beginnings of industry. What windmills do is they take kinetic energy, they take the wind, they spin up here, and it attaches it to a number of gears. Usually in Europe, it was used for grinding up grain, wheat, into flour. It will also be used eventually to pump water. They'll do other things with it. And this is like eventually it's going to be used to produce electricity, but that's not going to be for some time. This is one of the ideas that come from the Arabs. Another idea that starts to come into play, and this isn't from the Arabs. I'll give the Europeans credit for thinking of this for themselves, although they may have seen the Arabs using it. Europeans had always known how to use and make steel, as you can see back here. They used it for their swords. They used it for implements of death and destruction. Well, they get another idea. The rebirth of Europe, the Renaissance of Europe, began with the Crusades. Prosperity also began with the plow. Go ahead, put prosperity began with the plow. And by plow, put a little dash, and put steel tip. The steel tip plow. What you're looking at in this picture, this is a medieval plow. Now, what you do is, you have somebody in back here hanging onto it, driving that point into the ground. This front is attached to a harness, which is attached to oxen, which are just cows, or you attach it to horses or whatever to pull it along. And so that way you can plow, you make a furrow in the ground, eventually drop your seeds, bury them, and it aerates the soil, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this plow is a wood-tipped plow. It's what was used during the Middle Ages. Wood-tipped plows cannot break through rocky soils. They're kind of limited. And plus, the tips break all the time. Well, what the Europeans figured out that, hey, we can make a plow with a steel tip. With a steel tip plow, you can plow more lands. You can plow rockier soils. Prosperity began with a plow, steel tip. Put underneath, you can plow rockier soils. But type that in, plow rockier soils. If you can plow rockier soils, and your tip doesn't break all the time, you can plant more seeds. You can grow more crops. And suddenly you can have more food. If you can have more food. Now remember, at this time in the Middle Ages, you have the lords, you have the clergy, the churchmen, and then 97% of the population are peasants. What do those 97% of the population do? They farm. They have to farm. They have to farm so that way there's enough food for them to eat. If they don't all farm, there's not enough food to eat. And even in the Middle Ages, with 97% of your population farming, there were still periods of starvation. Well, now you can grow more food than you need. If you can grow more food than you need, then does everybody have to farm? And the answer is no. This has occurred before. Okay, again, plow before, plow after, and it's huge. You're like, so what? You put a steel tip plow, but that steel tip leads to, again, it's like a domino. It's a domino that leads to the next domino. Not everybody has to farm, and if not everybody has to farm, they can do other things. Thus, the population of Europe, notice it was kind of flatline. Ever since the fall of Rome, population had been flat. Now it starts to explode. Well, no, but explode. It starts to increase dramatically in the later Middle Ages. Why? Steel tip plow, more food than needed. Starvation is pushed aside. Go ahead, type this in your notebooks. Starvation is pushed. Starvation is pushed aside, and not all peasants now need the farm. What can they do now? There's excess food. They can specialize. Now, specialization. I am a specialist. I don't grow food for myself. I don't even hunt, except with my car, and only animals that walk on two legs. If there's excess food, you can specialize, you can do other things, and get involved in trade and industry. You can get a job. You can open up a factory. You can make products. You can buy goods. You can sell goods. In other words, it's the modern world come back again. And this is the Renaissance. This is rebirth. We had this during the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire imported grain. They had huge, massive farms, latifundas. All that sort of collapsed with the fall of Rome. Well, now it's all coming back again with the steel-tip plow, the Crusades. Europe is going to take off once more. The population is going to increase, and these people are going to do great, incredible things. They're going to become artists. They're going to become painters and traders and industrials and factory owners and workers, and thus the medieval world is going to go away, because the medieval world was lords, clergy, peasants. Well, now we're going to have lords, clergy, still peasants, and now we're going to have this rising middle class of industrialists, traders, merchants, people that are going to have opportunities to get money for themselves and become rich. In some cases, as rich as lords. This is going to turn the medieval world upside down, and thus the medieval world will no longer exist. Thus, the Renaissance. At the same time, all this is happening. Luxury items are coming into Europe from the Far East. Type this in your notebooks. Luxuries. Luxuries like silks and spices. People will begin trading silks and spices and porcelain. Porcelain's like fancy dishes. Comes from China. Lords can't get enough of silks and spices. Spices like pepper, nutmeg, ginger, oregano. They're the spice of they're spices. They make food taste like food. Without spices, food doesn't taste like much. Now, they had salt, but they didn't have spices. Not with the fall of the Roman Empire and all that stuff, thanks to the Crusades, the reopening of trade routes, specialists, all that is coming back. And silk, so soft, so silky. If I had a tie on today, I'd show you some silk, because all my ties are made out of worm spit, which comes from China. I don't have a tie on right now. I have nothing here that's made of silk. Moving on. Now, Italian spice merchants, because the spice is going to come into Italy first. They will travel throughout Europe in order to make sure they're getting their silks and spices. They start to pay attention to the roads again. Who cared about the roads before? You had the old Roman roads. Well, now we start to repair them. They repair the infrastructure, so that way people can actually move about from place to place. And you don't have to be born in a valley and die in a valley. Now you can become a trader or a merchant. And lords begin to hold grand celebrations. They began to hold medieval and eventually Renaissance fairs. They hold celebrations to attract these spice and silk merchants to their lands to sell their goods, not only to them, but to many other lords that come and visit. There's grand entertainments. There's nightly tournaments. There's jousting and sword tournaments and entertainments of all kinds and foods. And then when that fair is done, they'll go to another lord's lands, or as Charlemagne would say, when Charlemagne gave out fiefs, they were called counties. So the fair would go from fief to fief or from county to county. And thus, the beginning of county fairs, which we still have today. They originate from this time period. Fairs are still today places where you can go and they'll have craft shows. They're places where you can buy unique goods. Now, some of these merchants that were traveling from place to place, they said, hey, why do I keep traveling around? If I just stay right here at this busy intersection, at this busy crossroads where there's a river going through, there's all kinds of people coming through here all the time. I don't have to go from place to place. The customers will come to me. And when enough merchants get that idea to set up shop in one little spot and they start expanding, they build their shop, they build their homes, what you have is you have towns. Some fairs are so successful, they become permanent towns. Towns are back. There were towns all through the Roman Empire. They pretty much all disappeared with the German tribes and invasions and the collapse of trade. Now towns pop up all over the place. Why? For trade, for industry. Why is Titusville here? Titusville's here because of trade in oil. We had access to oil and began to trade it. Titusville once a much, much bigger town than what it is now because trade in oil has kind of moved on and thus our town has shrunk in size. Every town that exists, it's there for a reason. Ours is because of oil, of course. Other towns just because they're on busy intersections. Pittsburgh, why is Pittsburgh there? Why does Pittsburgh exist? Now, that's not just a town anymore, it's a city. One time it was a town. Why does Pittsburgh exist? Because it's at the confluence of three rivers, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio River. Major trade routes. That's why the town grew up there. All right. So what happens is increasing population. Let me introduce you to I'm going to get rid of my face. So sad. Let me introduce you to the town of Norwich, England. This is a map of Norwich in the year 900. This is a map of Norwich in the year 1100. Now the maps are obviously drawn from different perspectives, but here you see the church. Here is that same church in Norwich. Obviously, what has happened to Norwich over the last couple of hundred years during the High Middle Ages, during the beginnings of the Renaissance, its population has exploded, baby. And this is what we have. Oh, by the way, what do you think this is? As towns grew, they started to protect themselves and build walls for defense and things like that. Again, this is something brand new. You had lords, you had clergy, you had peasants. And now we have lords, we have clergy, we have peasants, we have towns, we have tradesmen, we have merchants, industrialists, we have factories, we have glass makers, we have weavers, we've got silk merchants. It's crazy. Crazy things are happening. Yes, these towns quickly became overcrowded, the perils of urbanization. You see, towns were encased in walls. You could not expand out, so therefore you had to expand up. Towns became extremely overcrowded. Sewage was still relatively unknown. So oftentimes it was just dumped into the streets, and that's what this is showing you. I show this to you because A, it's disgusting, and B, these are not sanitary living conditions. You'll want to keep that in mind because that is going to become an issue during the Renaissance in just a little bit here. You don't want to be hanging around with poop. And in a lot of cases, that's what they were doing. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, and we got some trade terms to do for tomorrow. Hope you guys are having a great day. Make sure to take your notes.